Obrigado. The yellow bus had finally reached Portugal. They were minus one of the team, Linda, who had developed pleurisy, but having found a wonderful missionary family in Spain, Pops was able to leave her with them until she was well enough to join the team in Portugal. And because she was born again in Southtown Christian Fellowship in Leamington, she was a toughie who soon recovered and found her way to the mission. Moncao, a border town in the north of Portugal, was the yellow bus's first stop, where the team met their first Brazilian missionaries. It's been nearly 40 years since then, and hundreds of tent missions later, and Pops is finding it impossible to remember each individual mission, but he will always remember those Brazilians. It was as if the Brazilians had been in the house of Mary, Martha and Lazarus when they made him the supper that John describes in his Gospel. Mary's and Martha's brother Lazarus, whom Jesus raised from the dead, was sitting with Jesus while Martha served the supper. Mary poured her very costly perfume over the feet of Jesus, and the fragrance filled the whole house and gradually fell on the disciples. When the disciples finally left the house, they must have carried something of that fragrance with them into the world. It seemed to Pops that those missionaries had been in that same kind of place, where Jesus was loved and worshipped, and they were still carrying unconsciously that incredible experience. Paredes de Cora, a small town not far from Moncao, was chosen as the first site for the first tent mission. The tent went up without any problem except one. Pull, in English, was pusher, pronounced pusher in Portuguese. Pops, as everybody knows, is fluent in most languages and had gotten the hang of Portuguese in the first couple of days in the country. The secret, he told Nana, is just put an O on the end of every other word and everyone will understand. Yes, dear, said Nana. So Pops thought he had to correct the lovely young Portuguese English student who was relaying his instructions to the people helping with the tent. Pull, said Pops. Pusher, said Paula the student. No, pull, said Pops louder. No, pusher, said Paula. Pops shouted even louder. Paula started crying and Nana came to the rescue, persuading Pops that he might not have the grip on the language that he thought he had. Obrigado, said Paula. Danada, said Nana. Oh, said Pops. The first meeting and every other meeting was crazily fantastic. They would never finish until midnight or later, with lots of singing, shouting and dancing inside and outside the big tent. All the Brazilians and their children would be at every meeting. Joed and Noemi, with their small children, 3 of them, lived in a breeze-blocked shack with no electricity at the edge of the forest. Ananias and Lilia and their 4 children seemed to feed the whole town and the team with a few fish and a couple of loaves of bread. Jailson and his wife Lucia, who was pregnant with their second child, and their 2-year-old boy, lived in a very small mobile home. They sold it when a family that was saved in the mission said they could dig out a cave underneath their house and live there, so that they could look after the church that had just been born from the mission. There was a single lady, Maria Piraz de Luth, who had planted churches in Portugal and Angola. Pops heard not long ago that having retired back in Brazil, she decided she didn't like retiring, so travelled to the north of Brazil and planted some more churches. And finally, but not least, Helcio, a young man who didn't arrive until later in the year and spent his first night sleeping on a platform bench, who became the best interpreter Pops ever had. And because he could do the Oscili Ardiles trick, jumping over a football, then flicking it back over his head, he immediately became Peter's hero. Although those missionaries had given up houses, lands, friends and jobs, they were full of joy, fun and red-hot love for Jesus. And, to Pops' surprise, they all had some idea of how to play football, which made his work much easier. Over the next few years, Pops, Nana and the family took many teams to Portugal. Sometimes many were saved, sometimes just a few, but always there was that atmosphere of love and faith, and Pops knew that those people had been with Jesus. Joed and Noemi are now back in Brazil looking after a large city church. Ananias and Lilia have recently just escaped with their lives from the Amazon, where they were chased by illegal loggers with machetes and spears. Jailson and Lucia moved to Poland, where they planted a thriving church in Białystok and invited Pops to hold many tent missions. Helsio married a lovely girl who came over with Pops' next team to Spain and Portugal. They have lived in Portugal ever since, planting churches and raising a gorgeous family. Pops was very proud when Helsio asked him to be his best man at their wedding. Pops' speech brought tears to the eyes of the guests. It was not because he was moving, but because he still thought he could speak Portuguese with an O. Gloria Deus.